Thank you for downloading this podcast of Andy's Movie Mashup from GFM 107.1. For rights reasons, the music has been removed, so it's just me talking. Enjoy. Okay, it's time for the first review of the show. This is I'm going to talk about a movie called When Marnie Was There, which is a Japanese cell animated movie that came out a couple of years ago. It's from Studio Ghibli, who are quite famous. I think probably their most famous release in this country is a film called Spirited Away that had the benefit of being sort of supported and championed by John Lasseter from Pixar and was distributed by Disney. And prior to that, Studio Ghibli films were pretty hard to find over here. But they've become somewhat mainstream worldwide now, and this is also distributed by Disney. And it's the last film to be produced by Studio Ghibli when founder and longtime director Hayao Miyazaki was in charge. He's now retired. The studio's taken a hiatus, but it will be back. But it'll be back without him in charge, so it'd be a very different proposition, probably. But anyway, I'm digressing madly. When Marnie Was There is a story of a young woman called Anna, not a young woman, a young girl called Anna, who lives with her foster mum and dad in a city called Sapporo in Japan. But she's not very happy, she's pretty troubled. So they send her off to stay with some relatives of theirs, or they're not actually relatives, they're friends, near the seaside. Obviously, quite a lot of Japan is seaside because it's an island nation. But and there, she meets a young woman called Marnie, who seems to have some kind of connection to Anna, but but only Anna can see Marnie and talk to her and see some of the things that Marnie has seen and knows about. And Anna kind of comes out of her shell and becomes a bit less troubled because of this. Now, it's all rather beautiful. I'm treading carefully because I don't want to give away spoilers and things like that. And it's quite a spoilery film. There's a lot of plot. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But I think what really captivated me and my wife and my son, we all watched this together. The cell animation, sort of hand-drawn animation on this is absolutely beautiful. There's so much detail and stuff going on and things to see that this, it becomes a character all of its own for me. And the tale is beautifully told. It's quite short, it's just over an hour and a half long. It might even be a little bit less than that. Has a nice voice cast, so it's been dubbed into English. So Haley Steinfeld, who was in True Grit, is Anna. And then there's supporting cast of Catherine O'Hara, Gina Davis, John C. Reilly, Ellen Burstyn, and Kathy Bates. So it's a really great quality voice cast. It's received very good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a rating of 92%. The official consensus reads, When Marnie Was There is still blessed with enough visuals and narrative beauty to recommend, even if it isn't quite as magical as Studio Ghibli's greatest works. I think that's a bit of a backhanded compliment, in my opinion. I think that it is really, really good. It is very moving. As I said, the cell animation is a character all of its own. Highly recommended if you missed this on release and you like animation. It's a U certificate, so it's good for the whole family. Terrific film. When Marnie Was There. I'm catching up on Studio Ghibli stuff. I've realised that there's another one that I haven't seen, which is called The Tale of Princess Kaguya, which I'm looking forward to watching as well. Okay, it's time for talk about the second film this week. This is a movie called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, which, if you think about it carefully, is an acronym for something that I'm not going to talk about here. And it is a 2016 American biographical war comedy drama. Yes, they still make those. I'll go into a bit of that later on. But directed by Glenn Ficarra and John Raker, written by Robert Carlock, and based on the memoir The Taliban Shuffle, Strange Days in Afghanistan and Pakistan by Kim Barker. And the film stars Tina Fey, Margot Robbie, Martin Freeman, Christopher Abbott, Alfred Molina, and Billy Bob Thornton. It was released this year, back in the spring. And it's also produced by Lorne Michaels and Tina Fey, who are producers of Saturday Night Live. So you kind of get an idea of what you might be getting with this film, but you might be wrong. So the story is that Tina Fey's character who is Kim Barker, is pretty dissatisfied with her job working in network TV news, wants to shake things up a bit. So she decides, she asks to be posted to Kabul in Afghanistan because she wants a bit of excitement and she wants to see, to go and be on location. And when she arrives there, she finds that there's something called the Kabubble, which basically means that all of the Western people who live in Kabul are kind of ignoring the fact that there's a war going on outside and are partying like it's 1999. And this is all very reminiscent and interesting of stuff that I'll go into in a minute. But anyway, she sort of gets embedded and tries not to have dalliances with other journalists and people of her security detail and things like that. But does fall quite heavily for Martin Freeman's character, who's a fellow journalist photographer. This is Martin Freeman with a Scottish accent, which is rather good, better than mine, and which sort of complicates things somewhat. And there's a very nice supporting cast. So Margot Robbie is very good. Alfred Molina is a local politician who plays it quite broadly, it has to be said, but he's very good. And Billy Bob Thornton is a very dry member of the Marine Corps who is there for sort of army security type thing. These are the people that she goes out with when she's going to find stories. Now, when I was talking about they don't really make films like these anymore, what I was referring to is things like Robert Altman's movie MASH, and also the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams. So, and those films, were set in, MASH is set during the Korean War, and Good Morning Vietnam is obviously set during the Vietnam War, and they have a kind of gallows humour, a kind of we just try and carry on regardless of the fact that the horror that's going on outside. And Whiskey Tango Foxtrot has the same kind of sentimentality to it, I think. Not the same kind of sentiment to it, I think. It doesn't shy away from the bad stuff going on outside in the same way that Good Morning Vietnam and MASH do show you the bad stuff that's going on outside, but it has a gallows humour and it has a sense of realism about it that is missing from a lot of films, I think, in a lot of ways. It does help that the cast are very good and very game, and they play it for everything that they can. And it's a very, very engaging story about a woman who's kind of, let's be honest, she's kind of having a midlife crisis. She doesn't really know what to do with her life, so she decides to go to Kabul, and things start to happen to her. So in that respect, I think that the film succeeds very, very well. It's funny, it's insightful. Also, the other thing about films of this kind is that there's a balancing act going on here, and it's a fine line. So you either go for comedy or you go for drama, and if you go too much one way, then it either becomes po-faced and preachy, or it becomes something that's making light of the serious stuff that's going on. And this film treads that line very carefully and succeeds, I have to say. I watched this with my wife, and we both really, really enjoyed it. We thought it was fantastic. Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a rating of 68%. Which I think is quite poor. And the consensus saying that while WTF is far from FUBAR, more on acronyms there, Tina Fey and Martin Freeman are just barely enough to overcome the picture's glib predictability and limited worldview, which I think is a bit rude. I think that it's way, way better than that. And if you like this kind of thing, if you like Tina Fey, if you like Martin Freeman, this kind of cast and this kind of story, I think you'll really, really enjoy it. It's got a lot to say about life, the universe, and everything. So there we go. That's a movie called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Okay, it's time for the final review of this show. This is a review of a movie that's out this week. It's Marvel Studios' latest, Doctor Strange, directed by Scott Derrickson. Written by screenplay by Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill, based on an original story by John Spates, who wrote wrote some of the early drafts of Ridley Scott's Prometheus, but we won't hold that against him. Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill. And it's based on Doctor Strange by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. And the movie stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Rachel McAdams, Benedict Wong, Michael Stuhlbarg, Benjamin Bratt, Scott Adkins, Mads Mikkelsen, and Tilda Swinton. And Marvel Studios. So you probably know what you're getting in terms of this kind of thing. But you might be surprised by this one. I think that Scott Derrickson comes from a sort of commercial, not commercials, but a commercial movie director, has made things like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which is a fantastic movie, introduced the world to the talent that is Jennifer Carpenter. He also made the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, but we really shouldn't hold that against him, because I think he was kind of shafted on that film in many ways, as he was just a studio gun for hire. The rather wonderful Sinister, which is a favourite of mine, and producer and writer of the sequel Sinister 2. Now, so you might think, what's the kind of horror movie director doing with something like this? But when they announced Derrickson's involvement in this, he said, I'm not going for a horror movie angle on this. I'm going for a kind of psychedelic fantasy, sort of magic, being part of the real world kind of thing. So that really intrigued me. And so a quick plot synopsis is that Benedict Cumberbatch plays Dr. Stephen Strange, a top neurosurgeon who is involved in a nasty car accident and loses the control of his hands, so he can no longer perform surgery. And he, of course, goes into a massive tailspin because of that. And in searching for some kind of answer or treatment or something that will help him get back on his feet, he ends up in Kathmandu, searching for someone called the Ancient One, who's played by Tilda Swinton, who can apparently help him with his condition, help him get back on his feet again. But what she actually teaches him is how to use magic in the real world. Now, this isn't in a kind of Harry Potter way. People don't use wands and things like that. The way that Tilda Swinton's character likens it is saying it's rather like a computer program. You have to learn how to write the code in order to use the magic. And where this film scores very, very highly indeed, for me, I went to see this with my son as well, is in the visuals. So in the way that people use magic in the real world, we see scenes that are very reminiscent of Christopher Nolan's Inception, where reality seems to bend in upon itself. I know there's a couple of scenes like that in Inception that are probably not very representative of the movie as a whole, but that's something to really think about with Doctor Strange. There's quite a lot of action that takes place with that kind of thing happening. There's also an amazing, I'm not going to give too much away here, but there's an incredible final act set in Hong Kong in which time moves one way whilst the action is moving the other way. And that kind of thing is really, really difficult to orchestrate on film. And Derrickson and his team, the whole crew, just do an amazing job of making it all look completely seamless. So I think this film scores in many ways, not least with Marvel Studios' desire to never make the same film twice, because this film looks and feels unlike anything that they've made before. I know I say that a lot about Marvel stuff. I'm really very impressed with their output and with their quality control. I think Kevin Feige is a fantastic man to be in charge of something like Marvel Studios, which, could turn out to be like the DC cinematic universe and be a complete mess. But actually, there's a kind of synchronicity to all of this that works really well. Cast-wise, Benedict Cumberbatch is terrific. He's there's a bit of Sherlock in there, but less irritating, I think. The script is very funny. Tilda Swinton is good in support. Rachel McAdams is great. Chiwetel Ejiofor is great. It's the core cast and the supporting cast are all very good. I think that the only problem with this film is in its main villain, Mads Mikkelsen. I think that he struggles when he plays a villain in movies, and although I think he's a very, very fine actor indeed, I don't think he's doing his best work here. But that's a minor quibble. a very minor quibble for what I think is a very, very fine film indeed. So I think if you've stayed away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and if you thought, this stuff isn't really for me, I think that Doctor Strange might change your mind. It's a very, very fine piece of work. Visually, it really pops. So Rotten Tomatoes already has a 98% approval rating. And the critical consensus reads, Doctor Strange artfully balances its outre source material against the blockbuster constraints of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, delivering a thoroughly entertaining superhero origin story into the bargain. Yeah, that's true. It does. I was talking earlier with the movie Whiskey Tango Foxtrot about films treading a fine line, and Doctor Strange certainly does that. It's very, very effective. So, highly recommended. Not just because I like Marvel and I like comic books. I think this is a very, very good film indeed. Go see. Thank you for downloading and listening to this podcast from GFM 107.1. Don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter at cockers_97 and on my Facebook page, which is Andy's Movie Mashup.